Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm here with Liane Davey. Liane, welcome.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here, Michael.
So, Liane, you are known as the teamwork doctor. You work with clients like Amazon, Walmart, Google, KPMG, Sony, a whole bunch more that people likely know. You're a keynote speaker, a New York Times bestselling author. You speak about leadership, teamwork, resolving conflicts. You're also a regular contributor to HBR, other media outlets like CNN, NPR, Forbes, and a whole bunch of others that seek out your expertise. And I noticed that you studied psychology at Western University and then got your master's and PhD from Waterloo. These are top schools in Canada for anyone listening going, what are those schools? And to start off, tell us like how much of what you learned during that time when you were studying about psychology, organizational, institutional, so forth, do you feel really kind of prepared you for entering the world as a consultant where you are today? And then we'll fill in some gaps.
Yeah. So my doctoral program at Waterloo was really phenomenal in a few ways and really did leave me feeling very, very prepared. So certainly Waterloo has a very large and prestigious psychology department. So all of the understanding the theories of human behavior and behavior at work was all there. We had to take, even just to get my master's, there were 14 courses you had to take just to get a master's. So that was excellent. It was amazing. And then we had to do Waterloo. For those who don't know Waterloo is one of the world leaders in co-op education. And even getting your master's degree, we were required to do a co-op term. And so I had work experience and I had a consulting contract as my work experience. So that was great. And
Mm.
then the most, I think the thing I'm most grateful for 25 years later is when I decided I was really interested in innovation and how team dynamics affect innovation. Waterloo was the kind of place where I could say, I want, and this is the truth, I had one PhD advisor in psychology and one in engineering. And how cool is that? Because I wanted to study how team and human dynamics affect innovation. And we had an Institute for Innovation Research at Waterloo. And so that was just another great learning to say, hey, if there's something you really want, even if it doesn't, you can't color within the lines, it's not a standard psychology program, go make it happen for yourself and go learn and get access to the people you need. And Waterloo was just a place that was like, sure, we've never had somebody have an advisor in psychology and one in engineering, but sounds good to us. So, I came out feeling really well prepared and less so from the specific courses because if I think about all the psychology studies that I thought were truth, many of them have been debunked since, but it was those places where there was ambiguity. I was expected to kind of bring order to chaos, build a program for myself. That's the stuff that prepared me for consulting for sure.
And then kind of as you transition from education and into the beginning of your career, you worked at a company called Watson Wyatt as a senior consultant for about 6.5 years. Looking back, what were a couple of the kind of big lessons that you took from those 6.5 years there that you've now kind of benefited from as you work with clients all around the world?
Yeah, the first thing I learned was that, and I share this advice with people graduating all the time or people in the career hunt. I always say, figure out what currency you have and what you want to buy with it. And so I was finishing a doctorate in psychology, and a lot of my doctoral work focused on measurement. So my internship was building a measurement system. Some of my research was around building measurement. I was pretty advanced on statistics and that sort of thing. And I knew at the time coming out in 1998 that employee engagement was all the rage. And so there was a lot of statistics going on around employee surveys. So I had this currency. Even as a 26-year-old female, I had something and was seen as more expert in something than the people that they had in the firm. I didn't want to do stats and employee surveys for very long. So the first really important thing I learned is that you could use your own currency to buy something you wanted. And it turns out employee surveys get reported to the executive team and sometimes even to the board of directors. Aha, I was going to be able to buy access. And although I didn't yet have credibility about what they could do to fix the problems of a survey, I was going to be in those conversations. So that was a big learning for me. Was all through my life now, I figure out what are the currencies I have. And it's hard because we take those things for granted when we have them. They're just who we are, or how we think, or how we're wired. But if we can think of them as currencies and then be clear on where those currencies are particularly valuable and what we can get with them. So that was a big learning. The other big learning there from a consulting perspective was Watson Wyatt was a firm that had grown up from actuarial pension and benefits. And I was in this weird, strange human capital group talking about organizational effectiveness and what they would have called touchy-feely stuff. And I learned that it's hard to be the small upstart practice in consulting. It's hard to be the type of person where it's a different business model than what the core is. So I learned about being an outsider. But at the same time, I learned that a small group of us had a vision for what was possible if human capital, human behavior experts came together with benefits experts, actuaries, compensation experts, and what was possible when we got into interdisciplinary work and how we could solve some of the juiciest, hardest, most interesting challenges for clients. And so when I left Watson Wyatt, it was to try and do some more of that. Like, how do I get even more opportunity for that interdisciplinary stuff? Because I'm just not really motivated by the siloed kind of deep expertise, but in a well, my dad used to tell me that getting a PhD was learning more and more and more about less and less and less till you learned everything there was to know about nothing. So I,
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
yeah, I
Um,
already had that bias of not wanting to be so deep that I wanted to have some breadth.
right. When you mentioned currency, I mean, I think that's a really powerful kind of concept framework for people to play with. If you were talking to somebody, what questions would you suggest they ask themselves? Like, what would be the process that you would recommend that somebody should go through to maybe uncover what the potential currency or what the most quote unquote kind of profitable currency could be for them?
Yeah, so I think you can start by asking it of yourself. And I would just do things like, looking at what are some of the skills I have, what's some of the knowledge I have, what's my personality. So you can go through a reflection exercise about yourself. And each time you list something, go to, I always say, what, so what, now what? So when you say, well, I know how to program in Python, like, okay, that's nice. What's the so what of that? Well, so I can do this, or I can help to bridge communication between these people and these people who don't normally, talk to each other well. Or so get to the so what, and then get to the now what. Okay, so who could I talk to about that? Where could I apply it? What might I need to add to that to make it really powerful? That sort of thing. So you can go through that yourself. I would say my experience in talking to people about this concept is that you won't get a full answer by doing that. We're not very good we're like fish in the water we swim in, right? We don't even know it's there. So once you do that, I would ask the same questions of someone else. When you think about me, when you think about what I would bring to an organization. So, sometimes we have people, I was talking to somebody about it recently, and they had lots of global experience, and they just took that for granted. I said, well, here's
Yeah.
a company where all that work you did and helping. So this is somebody who worked in a massive, massive technology firm, and she was in HR, and she had led a project on getting work moved to the best geography to do it in. So how do we get more of our engineers in India, and how do we understand? She'd done all this global work, and it was in HR, but she had this global business expertise that was a real currency. And she just thought about it as, I don't know, it was just a project I did. So give it to somebody else and ask them those questions as well. What do you know about me? What's the value of that? How could I frame it? And then the now what? What would I have to do to turn that into a currency?
Yeah, no, I think that's really powerful. It reminds me of an exercise that one of our early coaches gave us, which was to email, I think it was like 10 or 15 different people that we had relationships with, and ask them, in my case, like what do you know me best for? What do you think I'm best at? And it was interesting to get back those replies from people, because then you start looking for the common threads. It's not just like the one-offs, but what are multiple people saying that is the same? And
Yeah.
then, are you actually leveraging and communicating those? And I think oftentimes we don't. So the example you just share right now is a really great one.
Yeah,
So
and then
let's
asking
go ahead.
asking them, and who do you know who values that? Like, don't miss the
Mm,
second half of the question, right? Where
mm,
is that a currency? Because they
nice.
also are more likely to know places that you know who would really value that, and you might never have thought of that. Really, that
Yeah.
would be valuable to them. So ask the follow up as well.
No, I
Sorry.
think that's a really great point, Leanne, that like so often we people don't ask that next question. You get some information, you go, okay, great. Like you kind of think about it, but don't act on it. And so from like a marketing perspective, right, you might do some outreach to get in front of somebody, but if you don't follow up, you're missing, the majority of the opportunities. So I think that's a really great example there. Let's fast forward for a moment then. So you spend that 6.5 years there. You then spent 10 years at a search, recruiting, and kind of leadership company, right, as an executive. Were you at that point already starting to think about going out on your own and starting your own business, or were you just heads down deep in executive world?
Yeah. So it's funny. My dad was an entrepreneur for many, many, many years. And by the time I moved to Knightsbridge, he was thinking about it and harassing me about it. When are you going to go out on your own? Right? Yeah.
Sure.
Um, and he just saw from the beginning that in some ways, well, so to me, the equation was always, am I more valuable to Knightsbridge than they are to me? And my answer to that question for 9.5 years was no. They are just as valuable to me in what I'm learning, that I had executive experience opportunities. The caliber of my colleagues was phenomenal, all those sorts of things. So the math for me for a long time worked out really well. But at about 9.5 years, it was starting to be okay. So when I left Watson Wyatt to go to Knightsbridge, I always described it as I needed to be repotted. If my flowers were going to bloom as nicely as possible, I just needed to be repotted. And it was because the kinds of clients we had, the kinds of accounts we had, the kinds of challenges, I had learned how to succeed at those. And people were already coming to me for answers to how to think about things. And I'm like, I'm 33. I'm way too young to be the one people are coming to. I need to go somewhere where I'm not the smartest person in the room. I need to, repot myself. So I for a long time felt like the pot had a lot of room in it at Knightsbridge. It was really great. And then at a certain point, I was like, I need some new challenges. And
Mm,
while I had been a leader, that was great. I wanted to be a business owner. And when
mm,
I first left, I thought I wanted to grow a firm. It took me about 3 months to realize that no, I didn't. But so I loved being at Knightsbridge for most of that time. I was very all into building something. I loved the idea of this Canadian firm that was recognized on the Kennedy Information Grid. We were definitely punching above our weight in the world. And that was super fun. I really had a very valuable experience at Knightsbridge. I loved it.
two things. So you mentioned, that it was clear for you at that point that you did want to start a business, even maybe a little bit before you actually did. Why was that clear? Like, why not go off, take this 10 years of experience, as an executive, a VP at Knightsbridge, and go to a bigger company or whatever it might be, whatever growth looks like for you that would be meaningful. Why not do that? What was telling you, what was the conversation in your mind that I actually want to start my own business?
I'm not very goal oriented and I'm not very money oriented. So it was funny. My boss for many years at Knightsbridge, who's a dear friend, he would every year talk about, what are your goals? Where do you want to be in 5 years? And that question always left me cold. It was like, I don't know. I want to feel like every day I'm learning new things. I'm stretching. I'm doing something interesting. As long as that's true, I'm good. I really, and so, I could have gone to another firm. It probably would have meant higher sales targets and more I needed to build and more I needed to do for other people. If I'm honest about, can I be this candid on a recording? We had an annual general meeting at Knightsbridge at one point, and I was a shareholder by that point. And they announced that they were selling the company. And what I looked at was that people who bought in at the very beginning and then didn't work in the firm, just had lots of money, put their money in, went away. They made huge amounts of money off of Knightsbridge. And I kind of said, off of me, right? It was me missing dinners with my kids. It was me, like it was me working my butt off that got them all that money. And I think at some point I was like, if I'm going to make somebody rich, I'd rather it was me than some old white guy that is like playing tennis while I'm working. So I think I got a little disillusioned in the system at some point. I didn't want to join another consulting firm. I don't think I ever would have found a firm better than Knightsbridge. I really loved that firm. There was nothing um, wrong with it that wouldn't be more wrong somewhere else. It was just the whole model at some point was, I don't want to work for somebody else anymore. And I don't want to work as hard. So ever since starting Knightsbridge, starting Three Co's, leaving Knightsbridge, we've taken 9 weeks vacation every year, 10 this year. I didn't want to work as hard. Yeah.
The other thing you mentioned, so thanks for sharing that. I mean, I think that'll resonate with a lot of people and be helpful as they, consider where they are in their life right now. But you also mentioned that you initially planned when you started your company, Three Co's, that, or you're kind of been thinking about it, that you might build a firm, and then you've dialed that back to where essentially it's you and your co-founder, who is your husband.
Yes.
Why? So what changed in your mind that had you initially, like, why were you so excited about the firm model, and then why you decided to roll that back into being more focused or smaller scale with you and your husband running the company?
So if you think about that annual general meeting, and then I think, I don't want to make somebody else rich, I want to make myself rich. I was so in the grind of our growth culture, of our bigger is better culture, more money is better culture. I had just always been in that. And so I was very self-confident. I felt like I could do that as well as anybody could do that. And it was just momentum, inertia, really. And I got out and had 2 or 3 months where I could be like, at 3 o'clock, I could be like, oh, I don't have anything else pressing. I'm going to cook a really fancy dinner, or I'm going to go to the gym, or like whatever. All of a sudden, I was like, this is the best kept secret. Like, there is more to life than this. And literally, it was within 2 or 3 months that I realized, and Craig and I were completely aligned about this, that growth is not a panacea. And it's really interesting. We're a member of a industry association of other firms like ours, and some of the people in this are very well-known names that all of your listeners would know. And I had quiet conversations with them and just said, if you were where I am, and we joined that organization our first year, right? If you were where I am, would you grow? Would you build a firm? And many of them said, no, I don't do it. And they said, you know what? I've made more revenue every year, but I've never made more profit than I made, right, than I made when I was doing it. And my lifestyle has suffered. And so it was really understanding and getting out of that hamster wheel that so many of us are on. And in consulting, you're constantly on it. And just saying, I want to do phenomenal work. I want to translate that phenomenal work into ideas and books and articles that change the world. And I don't want to take it all too seriously. And I want to make sure that, my kids, because when we started Three Co's, our elder daughter was going into high school. And so we made a call that we wanted those 4 years we had left with her to be very family oriented. And so we said, we're going to take the entire month of August as sabbatical every year. We're going to go to a continent a year. And so we did 5 continents over 5 years, all those things that were possible because we got off the growth trajectory. And we just said, nope, really meaningful work translated into things that will change the world with the space to play and enjoy and thrive. And that's really been the story for the 5 years since.
Appreciate you sharing that. I want to push back a little bit, because I think as listeners are taking this in, some people might be saying, well, like, tell me more about how did you reach that decision point? Because someone might be in a very similar position where they're transitioning from corporate into consulting. And as you said, you're working through maybe early days of your business. You don't have a ton to do because maybe you don't have a ton of clients. And so it's 3 p.m. And sure, yeah, you could cook a nice fancy meal, which next time, please send me the invitation. But or you could do what a lot of people do, which is, okay, it's 3 o'clock. Like, what else can I do today? Like, what else do I need to work on to build a business, to contact more people, like kind of hustling and grinding and just putting in more work? What was, if you kind of think back to that time, what shifted in your mind coming off of the growth kind of, focus moving forward to, yeah, I'm happy. I don't, like, I've gotten what I need to get done today. I don't need to keep grinding. I don't need to keep pushing. I'll get back to it tomorrow. Was there something that you learned? Just what kind of trying to get to the source of where that shift came from?
So here's me. I'm giving you all the the real goods. I don't know what people are going to think about me afterward, but part of it was I started putting the checks in the bank. And it's pretty amazing how much you realize when you've worked in a consulting firm. I was probably making about 20 cents on the dollar.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden you can charge less. And I didn't charge less, but you can charge less, work half as much and make twice as much. Like it's crazy the extent to which consulting firms are huge beasts with massive overhead that mean any given practitioner is probably making a very small percentage of what they're bringing into the firm if you're good.
Right.
And so the first thing was like all of a sudden, so it was funny because I had my last day at Knightsbridge on one day. The next day, I was in Silicon Valley facilitating strategy for Sony PlayStation. The first day, that was the first day of Three Coast. And I was like, it's going to
So how did that happen? Because
a
walk us through that.
connection.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this
So,
is someone that you knew, or take us through the early days of how did you build a business? How did you get your
yeah.
first few clients?
Yeah. So a couple things. So one, that was a person who'd been a client of mine at Knightsbridge, and she left the company where she had been a Knightsbridge client and moved to Sony PlayStation, and she phoned. So there was no non-solicit involved. There was,
Right.
it was just, here's a brand new. This is a relationship business. It is absolutely that particular client, who's also a dear friend now,
Hmm.
has been, I'm going to, has brought us into 4 companies
Right.
because she just keeps getting these promotions and these interesting jobs, and every time she phones us. So that was the first thing. Then I did have a non-solicit agreement, so I wasn't allowed to call any clients, but clients in a LinkedIn world, a non-solicit just feels so irrelevant. And so they would call and I would send a message to Knightsbridge and just say, this person is called, are you okay with me? And so, there was a good chunk that was existing clients. I continued. I didn't want to leave Knightsbridge in the lurch. I really love the company, love the people. So I said, if there's work that you own that you want me to continue to deliver. So part of it was that I continued delivering for 6 or 8 months. I did some work that was to make sure my clients were kept whole, that projects were finished, that sort of thing. And the phone rang. And again, the business has grown since then, but it didn't need to grow, right? I only needed to do about 50% as much work that first year to make more money than I had made before. So, it just kind of naturally, it was one call in the next. And in a LinkedIn world, people find you. And then the biggest business development strategy in Three Co's is exactly what I was talking about with that one client. It's that somebody leaves a company and we keep working with the initial company because you're doing good work and you've earned it, and you add the new company. And so the number of my clients today that are things where I could trace a family tree of clients is, almost all of them.
And is there anything that you've done over the years to, just ensure that you're nurturing kind of the pipeline, the connections and the relationships that you have to stay on top of that? Or is it just pen and paper, you just kind of think of people naturally? Like, is there any system or tool or any way that you kind of manage that whole process of the business development side?
Since I've decided that we're going full candor, um, I'm terrible at nurturing relationships. I'm absolutely horrible at it. And it's one of the reasons I'm a good facilitator, is because I'm very in the moment. And so the problem is when I'm not working with a client, I'm not usually thinking about them. So I am not what a consulting salesperson would ever tell you to be. In fact, at Knightsbridge, we had an assessment tool, and it was a sales assessment tool. And I scored one of the worst scores in the entire firm on this sales assessment tool. And it was just funny because I was like, you know what? It's not wrong. I don't do
Right.
any of these relationship selling things that people talk about. It's 2 things. I deliver really insightful work courageously. So a lot of my success is speaking truth to power. And once you get a reputation for speaking truth to power and having the hardest conversations, your name gets
By that,
around.
kind of just dig into that a little bit more. When you say truth to power, explain that for everyone listening.
So, doing team effectiveness with an executive team, which is what we spend a lot of our time doing, or doing strategy with an executive team, and it's the CEO that's the problem. Right? You're like, dude, you keep saying you want this from them and then you're doing this. That that ain't gonna work. And when I can literally so I remember this amazing president, such a smart guy, such a lovely guy. And he's like, I want more challenge and debate and juicy conversations and all that kind of thing. And then he would just go off giving monologues and chastising people in his meetings. And so I put a sticky note right in front of him while he was talking. And it said, dude, like it literally said, dude, you're not going to get a juicy conversation while you're talking. And I just put it in front of him. And so, first of all, he loved that. And the really great leaders love it because it's been a long time since anyone has told them what they need to hear. In consulting, I think so many consultants try and tell their clients what they want to hear, and then they will never be valuable. When you tell the client what they don't want to hear, you become very rare,
Yes.
very valuable to them, and they will call you every time because they know if they need to hear something uncomfortable, but that reduces risk for them or whatever else makes them better and stronger, then they know they're going to get it from you. So, speaking truth to power is one half of the equation. So, really insightful, really courageous, that sort of thing. And I guess the other thing that's in that for me is I do strategy and team effectiveness, and that's a very weird combo. And so when you can know somebody's business from the business strategy angle and the human dynamics angle, that's sort of the half of the value proposition I bring. But the other half is be fun to work with, right? Laugh, care about them, listen, be interested in them, all those sorts of things. And they they call you back. People
Mhm.
find me. I get calls from people that worked with me 10 years ago, and they're like, oh, do you remember me? I'm like, of course I remember you.
And
But
Liane, how much of that and them kind of finding you and calling you and so forth, do you feel comes from the content you create, right? I mean, you blog fairly regularly, a lot more often than many people do. Yeah, I know you say that, but your blog shows there's stuff up there, a lot more than many other people. And so what I'm wondering is like the content that you create, how much do you feel that also supports the growth of your business and inbound inquiries and that sort of stuff?
so I'm going to keep doing it. So me saying this again, I'm trying to be as candid with you as I possibly can be, because why bother if I'm not
Yeah.
completely candid? Um,
Courageous, right? You said the word courageous, so here we are.
yeah. Yeah. So I know everybody tells you you have to do it. From where I'm at in my business, do I think it makes a difference? Do I get calls because of it? Not that I can point to.
Right.
Really, not that I can point to. For me, first of all, some people journal, I blog, right? So I have an experience with a client. What I often do in the blog is I try and figure out what was it that I understood that they didn't? What was the epiphany I offered to them? And how do I share that epiphany with more people? It feels like serving. It feels like, if I have this incredibly privileged position, I need to give back. I need to offer that to people who can't afford my rates. So the blog for me feels like a couple of things. It's where so usually in the moment I'll say something and it's good, but it's not great. On Saturday morning at 6:30, I sit down to figure out how to make it great, how to really flesh out the idea. So it's a journaling reflection kind of process for me, and it's a service process. I believe profoundly that work needs to make a more meaningful and positive contribution to our lives, and if I can do something to help people make teamwork work in some way, then I'm going to do it. In terms of, does it create calls? Is it, I think it probably contributes to my clients thinking I'm valuable. But frankly, my most important clients are all CEOs. And how often do they read my blog?
Mm.
I'm not thinking it's all that often.
Okay.
Every once in a while. And I have a couple clients who do, but yeah, but
Okay.
it's the right thing
Another
to do.
question, quick question for you. So, how have things changed? When you look at your business, you shared before we hit record. Last year, you spent out 60 days, on the road, or 60 airplanes, or whatever it was, right, delivering talks and facilitating and so forth. With the pandemic, right, and COVID, obviously that's been cut down very significantly. What changes have you made in your business and your offerings? I know you just had two kind of client engagements or calls before we even jumped on here today. What have
Mhm.
you done? What shifts have you actually made, and how are you thinking about going kind of the future and going forward?
Yeah. So of course, everything went virtual. Just whoop, here we go. Um, and what I'm trying to do is mitigate the weaknesses of virtual based facilitation and really capitalize on the strengths. I'm really excited about some of the strengths. And the biggest strength is because I was on 60 airplanes last year, so much of my work is with global executive teams where they're all distributed and they have to come together physically for a 2-day offsite. All the thinking has to be crammed into that 2 days and they're not together again for another quarter. And so there was a lot of rushed thinking, a lot of, well, okay, get as much into the 2 days as you can. And from a learning perspective, from an insight perspective, that's suboptimal. And my husband and business partner, Craig, who's a neuroscientist, he would tell me that over and over, like, we're trying to get too much in here. And I'm saying, but like the
Yeah,
offsite is the unit of
yeah,
strategy or team effectiveness. So now we've just pulled it apart and we said, we don't have to play by those rules anymore. Nobody's getting on a plane. So the strategy process has become more. So what we've done in our strategy processes is we'll do things like have 3 days in a row once a month, and we'll do 3 half days. So there's more think time, more soak time. People don't have to be out of their business fully with that panic and distraction that comes. We can say, okay, we're going to have you for these 4 hours and we want you to focus, but we'll put the 4 hours in the middle of the day. So if you need to deal with stuff before, you need to deal with stuff after, but when we're in, we're all in. So the other thing is in the team effectiveness stuff. Um, sometimes there's a little bit more of a confessional kind of feel that I can be more candid when I'm just talking to a computer screen than maybe if we were there physically. So taking advantage of that, I find the power differentials are reduced when we each have the same size Zoom box and things like that. So we've been really trying to capitalize on the strengths of it and as much as possible to mitigate some of the downside of it. More pre-work, more homework, more kind of reflections in between to keep things top of mind, keep the juices flowing, and then also just trying to create some moments of levity and downtime that's missing that we really do miss in the work. So it's going great, and I gotta say, I am not planning to return to 60 flights anytime soon. I think about 50% would be lovely. I miss being with the clients for certain kinds of conversations. I miss the dinners and the time to get to know people as humans, a little bit of that. But we get together physically for things that not only don't benefit from it, but sometimes are worse because of it. And so there's going to be a really focused effort on my part to encourage clients to use virtual more frequently and for the right things in the future. So that's one thing that will be a positive change, I think.
I want to thank you. I mean, there's so much that I really enjoyed the conversation. So much more that I'd love to dive into with you, but I know that I want to respect the time that we have here today. Where should people go to learn more about you, your work, your most recent book? What's the best place kind of for them to dive deeper into Liane's work?
Yeah, probably the best place is just leandavey.com. The Three Co's website is going to be getting an overhaul. It's a bit needing of one at the moment, but leandavey.com is where the blog is. So as you said, I think there's about 500 or 600 articles with free resources and all sorts of good stuff there. A little bit about me, but hopefully you realize that what you see is what you get. And then certainly Liane Davey, the message comes right into my email inbox. If anybody has any questions or wants more unvarnished truth about my experience
Yeah.
of consulting, as you can see, it's the only way I roll is candor and
Wonderful.
courage. So
Fantastic. Liane, thanks again so much.
my pleasure, Michael. Thank you.